Good morning and welcome to today's episode of Women Empowerment Program, being organized and sponsored by the Rule of Law and Empowerment Initiative, also known as Partners West Africa Nigeria P1. My name is Nkem Okereke, your host for the show, with my co-host Ijoma Igwe. Our topic for today is changing gender norms. We are bringing this topic based on our usual implicit, informal rules about appropriate behavior for people of different genders that most people accept and follow without asking who made these rules, and the ways which gender equality, women's and girls' rights, and the norms impact on empowerment of women. Conor Franta, an American author and businessman, once said that gender is specific only to your reproductive organs, not your interests, likes, dislikes, goals, and ambitions. We will go on a short break and then come back with our guest for this topic.
Welcome back. To discuss the topic, changing gender norms, today with us is Barrister Omowunmi Ogunrotimi, who is a multidisciplinary legal practitioner with demonstrated experience in policy advocacy, gender-based violence programming, and community mobilization. She's currently the Executive Director at Gender Mobile Initiative, which aims to increase the reportage and reduce the incidence of gender-based violence through coordination of linked services. Please welcome with us this morning Barrister Omowunmi Ogunrotimi. Good morning, Mama. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning. Welcome. We are lucky to have you.
Good morning. Today. Good morning.
Yeah, so Ma, we're discussing changing gender norms. So how would you define gender norms and how does it impact on empowerment of women?
Thank you for that question. So I think that to properly do justice to this, it's really important that, we understand the concept of gender norms and, of course, what empowerment means and, try to find a nexus between gender norms and empowerment of women. So I would say that gender norms are like, social standards or principles that define, the expectations, the opportunities of girls, women, boys, and men. And of course, this kind of restricts the expression of their gender identity. And when you look at it in general in the society today, if you're talking about gender norms, for example, we have an understanding that women or girls should be the one to do house chores. We have an understanding that they should be the one to, engage in reproductive roles, even though, this could be biologically driven. But to just say that, a lot of those norms are, determined by the society and they are also transferable and we keep reproducing them by way of social interaction. And, moving on to what empowerment means, I personally like to look at the concept of empowerment along, two contexts. And I mean, talking about processes and also talking about outcomes. Speaking about processes, I see empowerment as when women have, the ability to, decide on their own, the ability to actually challenge oppressive systems, the ability to transform their lives, the lives of their children, the lives of their communities, and also most importantly, I think the ability to also have control over their agency. When a woman is able to decide the number of children she wants to have, how she wants to have the children, the spacing of the children. I mean, this, of course, has to do with sexual and reproductive rights. So, I mean, this is really, really critical. It's a process. So speaking about outcomes, I mean, talking about the utopia, what then would be the situation if women are able to experience these processes? You know, what are we looking to have? Of course, if women are able to gain control over their lives, challenge oppressive systems, in terms of outcomes, we then have a situation where we are able to dismantle patriarchal social order. You know, we then look at the workspace as a place that is safe for everyone. We also have a situation where, at least even if we don't have it eliminated, but at least reduced to the barest minimum in terms of discrimination, sexual and gender-based violence, you know. And then we also have a state of affairs, which I would say, you know, I would credit to Hilary Clinton, where she said, human rights then become women's rights, women's rights then become human rights, So now, you know, bringing gender norms and empowerment of women together to create or to find that nexus. Of course, it's really clear that when gender norms are perpetuated in such a way that, you know, it limits opportunities for girls, for women, what that does is it limits their access to resources. So speaking about empowerment, it definitely would limit the empowerment of girls and women, especially if those gender norms are adverse.
Thank you very much for that. You really did justice to this particular question. So I'm going to ask you, for you to say that gender norms has a way to impact negatively on women empowerment, that means you believe it's essential, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what are other reasons that makes you believe it's essential?
So it's essential because if you're talking about gender norms, of course it impacts on the whole effort towards gender equality. Yes, so you'd realize that gender norms has actually been used to perpetuate violence. I'll give you an example, a classical example of instances where women, for example, stay back at home and all they do is to become baby manufacturing plants. Gender norms, you know, impacts on the aspiration of women. They feel they have to stay back at home, do the, you know, the domestic chores. And of course it impacts on also their sense of autonomy, whichever way you try to look at it. So all of this has a way of drawing us back in terms of achieving gender equality. So gender norms is very, very important, and addressing it also is equally important. And like I did mention, if we want to have, you know, a situation where there will be gender equality, I think what this would mean is that women would run half our companies, they would run half our parliament, they would run half our, you know, executive boards, and men would run half our homes. So, I mean, if you really want to achieve that, you know, utopia, then what it means is we need to address the gender norms that continue to subjugate and relegate women to the background.
Okay, thank you very much. So how do we go about addressing this?
So it's quite simple. At the same time, it's going to be a long walk to freedom, like Nelson Mandela did say. So speaking about addressing gender norms, so we need to do a lot around institutional reform. You'd see that gender norms is embedded in institutions, and then we keep reproducing it in the media, in the workplace, you know, looking at the agents of socialization, which is the school. In school, for example, when you walk up to your counselor could look at you as a woman and say, okay, you should go to the arts, sciences, you know, where you have engineering courses, where you have, what's it called, medical courses, especially for medical doctors, should be the exclusive preserve of the boys. And that is why, you know, this also perpetuates what we call occupational segregation. You'd see that men are mostly medical doctors, women are mostly nurses. So this also affects on the, you know, the equal pay. Even in some spaces where women and men occupy the same position, you'd see that there is still a gap in terms of equal pay, and that advocacy is ongoing regarding that. So, but to address all of this, we need to do institutional reform. Right in our institutions, we need to encourage people to aspire, especially women, as much as the men aspire. Also, we need to work on legal reform. So if there is an opportunity for women to go on maternity leave, men can also go on, that same leave. So what that does is you're encouraging men to be more responsible at the home front. We also need to do community education and empowerment. All of these norms, we reproduce them at different levels, especially at the community level. So what this does is to show that community has a really critical role to play in deconstructing the gender norms that continue to perpetuate discrimination, violence, and of course impact on the economic empowerment of women. Also, beyond deconstructing the norms, we also need to engage men and boys as allies. We need to focus more on the positive version. You don't talk to men or engage men like they are the problem or like they are potential perpetrators. But no, you talk to them like they're part of, the old system, and they're critical stakeholders, and they have a really huge role to play in all of this. So focus on the positive version in terms of communication, in terms of drafting men into this whole process and engaging them as partners.
So talking about community education, the one thing is educating the community. The other one is the community accepting the education and being educated. There is already this mindset. You get? There is already. So how do we do this? How do we break this barrier? Because I'm not going to call the state now. One of the advocacies we were doing at P1, we were talking about sexual and gender-based violence and how a man shouldn't flog you or beat you in trying to correct you as your husband. The women didn't take it. They were like, but how will my husband correct me if I'm
he
wrong?
Doesn't let me. So I think it's more of culture.
She already thinks she should be flogged to be corrected. And what if this man does wrong? Do you flog him or he doesn't do wrong? Do you understand? So one thing is educating them. The other thing is, how do they accept this education? Do you think there is a way to break this barrier?
So there would always be a way out, absolutely. And that's why when I started, I said it's a really long walk to freedom. I mean, these are deeply rooted, deeply seated, highly entrenched, beliefs, norms. And if you look at norms has to do with the way of life of the people. It could be socially accepted, right? So it has existed over a long period of time. Even if you're talking about legal reform, if you're doing legal reform, you still need to do stakeholder mapping, right?
Exactly.
So which means you need to identify who your allies are, who your who your opposition might be and all, so that you can, program appropriately. But to say that, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. And I always say the most important thing is that you're taking the step in the right direction, which means that, moving from point A to point B, you're sure that, it's in a sequential order. You don't put the cart before the horse. So it's going to be a long work, but with consistency and also mapping out the right people. And I want to say that a lot of resistance would come. Definitely. Do not forget that this is a community, that this has long been the accepted or acceptable norm. So if you're just coming to say this is bad, of course you should, exactly, you don't expect them to just welcome you. But, women need to actually also see what's happening in other spaces where women's rights are human rights in the real sense or in the true sense of the word. So that's why we always encourage inter-community interaction, so that they see how much progress is being made in communities where, a lot of importance is attached to the rights of women. And for the men, we also need to encourage them, because do not forget that the whole conversation about gender norms, some people are benefiting from it, do not forget. So if men are like the chief beneficiaries of this, you need to also interact with them or engage them strategically in such a way that they know that you're not coming to break the ranks. You're not coming to, talk down on their, but to see them as equal partners in this whole work that we're
So
doing.
basically, it's about identifying your stakeholders and your allies
Right.
in community education.
Yeah, I like the institutional reform you talked about. With the school, you use as an example where children normally say, oh, nurses, women, and then the boys. And then also at home, we have instances where the little boys are allowed to go and sit down and watch football with daddy, and the little girl go to the kitchen, wash the dishes, cook with mommy. That's where mommy is. Or sometimes you ask the little boy, where is mommy? She's in the kitchen. Where is daddy? Oh, he's watching football. He's with his friend. So it's something that I also think should also start from the home, from family, helping them to realize that, okay, if we start grooming these kids in a certain way, when they grow up, they will actually understand this thing we are discussing. I know when they're already like fully matured and then you're trying to change the whole thing, everybody will just be like, what's going on here? This is how I know it. Why are you changing it?
Absolutely. We are all products of socialization.
Yes.
And you'd see that a lot of times, some things children learn at home, they get back to school, they try to see if they can reinforce those things.
Yes,
Yeah.
The same thing when they learn in school, they get back home, and that's how some parents know that their children are being exposed to some vices in school, because these spaces are really important spaces that you can't look down on. They play a critical role, especially during the formative years of every child. So it's important that we leverage these spaces, the school, and also the media. So when you look at the media, what is obtainable in the media? What are the images that children are exposed to, men are exposed to? How do we perceive women on our television screens, you know? So all of this, the old gamut of, you know, socialization, we need to interrogate it. We need to, you know, create safe spaces where people can learn the right content. They can access the right content, learn the right content, grow with that content, and that's what they'll keep reproducing.
Thank you very much. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Our viewers, I hope you're enjoying it. We are going on a short break now and then come back to continue this discussion on changing gender norms. Please stay tuned.
Welcome back to the show, and I hope you're enjoying this conversation as we are here in the studio. But before we went on the break, you talked about some challenges that it's not going to be a smooth ride in changing gender norms, and you mentioned some of the norms that are already existing. That's not easy, you know, to change them. But we also want to find out from you, are there other challenges you think can be faced when trying to change gender norms?
Absolutely. I mean, what even looks like a challenge is also a cause in itself, and that's patriarchy. Yeah, so it's everywhere. I mean, I grew up to know what patriarchy means, and it's still very much in the space. We still keep fighting. Since I was born, we've been fighting patriarchy, and I don't know how long more, you know, we're going to keep the fight up. But to say that, I did mention earlier that there are some beneficiaries. So when you talk about patriarchy, it's a system of privilege and oppression. And the question is, who is benefiting from the privilege and who is the recipient of the oppression? So if I've been benefiting from a privilege for a long time and you just want to take it away from me, I mean, I would definitely want to resist. So it's normal as human beings. So that's one challenge that, you know, we have to keep fighting. And I think patriarchy is the root cause of, you know, inequality, because patriarchy talks about domination of men, superiority of men, and it continues to widen the inequality gap. So if you're talking about patriarchy, you're also talking about segregation, you're talking about discrimination, and it continues to subjugate women. So another challenge is internal barriers. I feel that we need to do a lot more on addressing internal barriers. Internal barriers, is always exercised by women. A lot of times we focus on the external, that's the institutional barriers, which we call the glass ceiling. We don't focus on the sticky floor, which is the internal barrier. As a woman, you know, I could have some internal barriers because I've been, you know, I've been socialized to believing that I shouldn't aspire to be this. I've been socialized to believing that my place belongs in the kitchen, you know, so I have to stay there. And even times when we need to stretch and go out of our comfort zone, we still don't believe that, you know, we can achieve that. Yeah. So that's why there's this book called Leaning by Sheryl Sandberg. That's the CEO of Facebook, where she actually talked a lot about internal barriers, about how women even come to the table without bringing a seat, about how women come into the table and they're pulling out rather than leaning in, about how women come to the table and you, even when you have, you encourage them to raise their hands up, their hands are down. And that's why you'd see that when women make success at times, they credit it or they attribute the success to some factors like, oh, I was lucky, I got it. But let a man win, you would say, I'm a smart guy, you know.
I worked hard for it.
Exactly. And the same thing also applies to women, you know, also changing their career path. You'd see a man who is maybe the MD in a bank. I mean, that's just an example, so somebody doesn't take me up on this. You know, you'd see that he doesn't even have any background in finance, in accounting, and maybe he has a chemistry background. But, you know, you'd hardly find a woman leave our comfort zone, you know, because women have to do a whole lot more to prove that they can do this. Meanwhile, men without experience would naturally be given a chance because they are men and they feel they are up to it. So that's an internal barrier for women. Women need to really fight that internal barrier for them to at least come out of that space and be able to speak out. And another challenge is for women who are even too vocal in spaces that are mostly dominated by men. Most times they denigrate such women with sexual harassment. Then it hushes their voice, they calm down, and then, you know, till they go silent completely. This is also another form of barrier. So we need to, I mean, we need to address these challenges in themselves. And then in terms of, you know, the loopholes in our policy and legal framework, this also remain a challenge. We need to keep advocating. We know, for example, that the Equal Opportunities Bill, you're all aware about what happened to it. So we are a product of our society, and as long as there are people benefiting immensely from the decay, from the rot, from the inequality, it will be very difficult, but we have to keep trying.
So you've said, you've mentioned the challenges, our internal barrier. So we want to discuss a bit of how to address these challenges. What do you think someone could do to break this internal barrier?
As women, we need to believe in ourselves. And as women, we need to keep paying it forward. Are you that woman who steps into the building and then you shut the door against the next woman? You know, we need to leave the door open because you came in because someone left the door open. So that's why I said we need to keep paying it forward. If we have more women there, we are hopeful, you know, that having more women there would, you know, translate into tangible results for emancipation of other women, liberation of other women. And we can maybe have, you know, a more equal world. Like I did say, if we can have men run half our homes. So I like to reference, whenever I have conversations of this nature, I like to reference, you know, the expression of Warren Buffett, that's the legendary philanthropist and investor, where he said, I'm largely, or I'm this successful because I'm only competing against half of the population. You know what that means? It means women are not even...
We are not bothered.
So it means women are not even playing in the space. They are not key players in the space at all. So, but, I mean, if we have other women come out, if it's probably competing with the whole population, you know, I'm sure that the world would even be better for it because we know that right now, you know, the face of poverty is feminine. So if we have a situation where women can come out women can encourage other women. We can have more women assume leadership position. I think we'll be able to bridge the leadership ambition gap. I always like to make reference to that, because when women don't even aspire to be more, then there's a problem.
You know, you also said you grew up learning about patriarchy or hearing patriarchy. I also grew up hearing patriarchy. It seems this patriarchy doesn't have a solution, or nobody is addressing it. Is that your opinion too?
So no, patriarchy has a solution, just that, you know, the question is, do we have a long-term solution to it? It's not gonna, it didn't come overnight, so it's not gonna disappear overnight. So with concerted effort, a lot of organizations and maybe government are, you know, coming up with different initiatives, but we need to think more about initiatives that are sustainable. So we need to do a lot at the community level, because that probably is where we need to start from, and then we should have actually a meeting point between the top-down approach and then the ground-up approach. So that way, you know, we have a meeting point where, as we're taking it from the top, advocating for institutional reforms through legal and policy advocacy, we can also then do a lot around driving behavioral and attitudinal change at the community level. So we find a meeting point. So with that, it's a long walk, like I did say, but we'll get there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this wonderful enlightenment. Our viewers, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. So what I'm taking from today's Changing Gender Norms is that, gender norms are these roles that are assigned to different genders and somehow hinders empowerment of women, because there are some certain things we as women are expected to be and not be. Ijoma, I don't know if you have other things to add to what she has said.
Takeaway from her is the internal barriers. So every time we talk about gender norms and the patriarchy, we always come up, oh, the society is not allowing us. But it's for we as women to understand that we also have some internal barriers that if an opportunity is even put in place of us, we might even miss it because of the barriers we have internally. So as women, just like she said, we need to break those barriers. So when we have the opportunity to come out and do something, we just do it without having those barriers. So we have to conquer ourselves first and then go out to conquer what is it in the world. And then I also like the fact that she talked about the institution and the socialization and everything. So we see that gender norm is not about just changing what is already there. We also need to start from the kids, start from the home, from the school. I even wanted to add, when you were talking about the nursing and everything, you can see even in school, the students' union governments, the male is always the president, the female is the vice president, or she's the treasurer or something. So there's already this thing that women should just have to be in the second place while the men lead. So it's something that I think needed to be discussed, and we can start. She said it's not done in a day, so we do it gradually and then try to change.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Barrister Omowunmi Ogunrotimi, for coming on this program. Thank you, our viewers. And remember to always put in the comment section topics you would like us to discuss still on women empowerment. We will see you next week again, Friday at 11 a.m. For now, we will say bye.